I am Jamie Horn of Cranky Kangaroo, and I am a Grace Frame ambassador, and I am so excited to be back. In part one of the workshop, I showed you a little bit of my frame, and even though I have a small machine on it, how I use it creatively to make use of the small space. I showed you my quilt dress, and I showed you how to make a fun fabric using just scraps, or even yardage that you don't want to cut up into tiny pieces. Today, we're going to use the fabric we quilted to make a tote bag. I absolutely love it. Let me show you how I made it. We'll do it step by step, and even a beginner can do this. You really don't need a lot to make this tote. You'll need the fabric that you quilted, and I'm using about a 23 by 40 inch piece. You'll need a little bit more to make straps and pockets, but I'll outline all of the pieces and the measurements in the notes and details for this video. You will also need a piece of fabric for the lining, although technically you could leave the lining out and just use it without a lining. It's thick enough as it is. It doesn't really have to have a lining. But I included a lining to match, and you'll need the same size 23 by 40 inch piece. Now keep in mind, you can make this tote any size you want, so don't just go off my measurements. Make the tote whatever size you need. So let's get started. I cannot wait to show you how I made this. So let's start by cutting out our outside fabric. Now, remember to save these scraps because we can use them for another project. I am going to take a look at my fabric here and see what I like, and I am going to make a tote for a friend, and she likes blue, and this looks like really nice space right here. I love how it almost looks like a painting, so I think I'm going to make use of this. Now let's get an idea of how big our tote will be, because you can make it any size. But just by folding it in half and pretending this is the bottom of the tote, this is going to be the tote size right here. I really like that, but let's start a little bit bigger just to give ourselves some extra space. So let's make her a big tote. She has lots to carry maybe. So I like this shape. Let's go with this size. Now again, you can make a tote in any size. I will tell you what size mine is, but feel free to experiment and make it larger or bigger, whatever your needs are. So this is about 20 inches, so I'm gonna cut it about 40 inches long, and I'll do 23 inches wide. So let's start there. We're gonna cut our tote outside out of our quilted fabric. I'm going to start by squaring up one edge. And I'm using the True Cut rotary cutter and the ruler, and I love the little groove in the rotary cutter that goes with the raised part of the ruler. It makes it so nice and secure when you're cutting. So this way is going to be 23 inches. And this way is going to be 40. That's 36. There's 40 right there. There is our outside made, and I am so excited. I think it's going to be an amazing, nice large tote. I hope she likes it, but I think it's amazing. Now let's cut some handles, some straps. You can use your quilted fabric, you can use purchased fabric, purchased ribbon, purchased webbing, whatever you want to do. And the length is really up to you. I, a long time ago, came up with a general rule for straps, and this is just what I like to follow. My rule is I like the strap to be as long as the bag is around. So we have a 40-inch bag, you know, top to bottom, and I'm going to start there for a strap. And actually, this is a really good place to cut from. I like this straight line quilting. So we're going to make all of our numbers up as we go. Let's call it 3 inches seems too wide. Let's do 2.5. And I'm going to cut 2 strips, 2.5 inches wide by that 40 inches long. Okay, so there's our straps. I really like those. And we could cut a pocket out if we wanted to. I think an outside pocket or even an inside pocket. Sure, why not? Let's do it. So I'm going to just use this area. We'll cut a nice big pocket. This will be a good size pocket, like for putting a laptop cord in, and my friend does use laptops a lot, so maybe that will come in handy for her. There's a pocket. You know what? Let's do another one. Let's do it out of the organza area. Okay, so now we have 2 pockets. Now we need to think about our lining. So I'm going to cut the exact same size for the lining that I did for the bag, for the tote outside, which was that 40 inches by 23 inches. So here's our lining, our straps, our pockets, and our outside tote. I'm so excited to get this made. Let's take this to the sewing machine and I'll walk you through the steps. So let's start with adding binding to the straps. I have cut a piece of fabric that is 3 inches wide, and I've cut several of them and joined them end to end on the short edges. Fold them in half and iron them, and then add them to the long edge of your straps. Now when I'm sewing binding, I like to sew to the back and then flip it around to the front and top stitch on the front. And every time I sew binding, I double check first where my seam allowance needs to be, so that when I turn it around to the front, it'll hit in the right place. So I just double check that a couple times before I sew the whole length. So sew down one end of the strap and then turn it to the right side, turn your binding to the right side and top stitch right on that folded edge. You'll do this on all 4 long edges of the straps. And then you can trim the ends of the straps even when you're done. Now we'll bind our pockets just like we did our straps, and I'll show you what we do when we get to the corners of the pockets. But add the binding to the back of the pocket, and then we'll flip it around front to top stitch it. When you get to a corner, turn your binding so that the long edge of the binding lines up perfectly with the long edge of the pocket. You're folding your fabric at a 45-degree angle and creasing it, and then you'll stitch only to the crease and back stitch and take it off the machine. Now rotate your pocket and pull it back on that 45-degree crease. Bring your binding down to meet the raw edge of the pocket, and then you're going to fold that flap down and make a new crease. Now you'll start at the new crease and continue on. When you come around to the place where you started, trim that binding even and flip it around to the front, and then cut off the binding you're working on and fold it to the front. Sew to the edge and back stitch, and then fold everything to the front, and it should encase all of those raw edges. Then you'll flip it all to the front and top stitch all the way around. When you get to that first corner, fold up the bottom binding and crease in a 45-degree angle and fold over the right binding. This will take practice, so be patient, and this is a great opportunity to practice your binding skills. Let's sew the body of our tote. Fold the top edge in half and find the center and mark it with a pin or draw on it to mark the center point. Center the pocket on the outside of the bag and stitch down one side across the bottom and up the other side. Back stitching at the beginning and the end to make sure your pocket stays nice and secure. Fold up the bottom of your bag or roll it up to fit it under the throat of your machine as you're sewing. Repeat the process on the other short edge. Find the center, place the pocket, and sew the pocket on. Now let's sew our straps on. Normally I might put them right at that top edge, but when we flip them over, there's going to be so much bulk there. So I'm going to just sew them to the body of the bag, and I think I'll just put them on either side of the pocket here and flip them up later. So line them up with your pocket and pin it on one side, and then make sure your strap is not twisted when you pin it onto the other side. We're doing them right sides together here, so the right side of the strap is facing the right side of the bag. Now I'm going to sew and just kind of line it up at the top of the pocket. That's just a nice easy guide, and I'm going to use that to my benefit. So top stitch the strap on and back stitch at the beginning and the end. Do this on both sides. And then we're going to flip that strap up and just top stitch again. You're kind of encasing that raw edge. It really won't unravel or give you any trouble now that it's closed between those two stitchings. And repeat this for the other strap on the opposite side. Now here's where the fun part comes in, when we actually get to start sewing it into something that resembles a bag. So place the bag right sides together, and you're going to fold it in half and sew down one side towards that folded edge and backstitch at both ends. Do this on each side, left and right, towards that folded edge. Now I'm going to top stitch that seam open. It's pretty bulky, and it'll just make things lie so much nicer if it's top stitched open. This is optional, and if your sewing machine gives you trouble, or if this is too bulky for your sewing machine, you can definitely skip this step, but I think it'll be worth it if you do it. And you don't have to stitch all the way down into that folded corner. Just stitch as far as you can. We're going to end up cutting off some of that folded edge anyways. On the other seam, you might have to work from the inside of the bag or flip the bag right side out, but I'm just going to work from the inside of the bag and feel to make sure that that seam is open when I top stitch on each side. So right now our bag is just a flat bag, more like a book bag than a tote, I would say. It's just flat. We want to add some depth to it. So this is what you're going to do. The bottom fold comes up to meet the side seam and you create this triangle. And from here you can decide how deep you want your bag. You can cut off a little and your bag will only be a couple inches deep, or you can cut off a lot and your bag will be a lot deeper, a lot wider. So this is totally up to you. I think right about here looks good. That's a pretty good depth. Gives you lots of space to put things in it, and that's what I'm going to go with. So I will mark this where I like it, and then when I go to the sewing machine to sew this, I will use a piece of tape on my sewing machine throat so that I can keep it consistent when I sew all four seams like this. The point of the fold will stay right on the edge of that tape on my machine. Now it's important that your side seams stay perpendicular to the new sewing line that you're making. So it needs to be at a perfect right angle, like a T, to the sewing line. Now trim this off about a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch from that new sewing line, and repeat this on the other side. So fold the bottom edge of your bag to meet the side seam and you'll create that little triangle. Put the tip of the triangle right on the edge of the tape and make sure that side seam stays perpendicular to the stitching. Turn this bag right sides out and set it aside, and we're going to do the same process with the lining. sew the side seams of the lining together with the right sides facing. And you don't have to top stitch the lining seams because they're pretty thin. You can use a pin right on that bottom folded edge to match up the folded edge with the side seam. That'll help you get everything lined up where it needs to be. You could also use a ruler to mark your line to make sure it's nice and straight. So put the seam line right on a long measurement line, and then make sure that the bottom of the ruler is where it needs to be and just draw on it. Here's the last step of our bag making process. The lining goes inside the outside. The lining and the outside go wrong sides together this time. We're not going to sew it and then flip it. We're just going to sew it together and add the binding along the top edge. So pin the lining to the outside all along that top edge. Just sew with a long stitch through all layers to get them to stay together until we add our binding. This just makes it easier to add binding. We're not wrestling with the layers and trying to keep them from shifting on us. And just like we've done before, the binding goes to the wrong side and we'll flip it around to the right side. So put the binding all along that top edge. When you come to where you began, you will trim it and fold one edge over and tuck it under the other edge. Now fold your binding to the outside and top stitch all the way around. This is it. This is our last step. Now we could include the straps. When we top stitch, we could top stitch over the straps, but I'm not going to do it in this case. I kind of like that you can flop them off to the side if you want to. So I'm not going to sew them into the binding, but you absolutely could. You can get all of the Grace products I used on this project at graceframe.com or through your local Grace dealer. Look what we just made! I hope my friend really likes it. If she doesn't, I'll keep it. I'm really happy with it. I love this fabric that we made. I love that it was such a nice way to use scraps. And I love how like painted it looks. The pockets almost look clear, like they just go straight through to the bag. That's a fun effect too, especially this one. So I'm really happy with it. I've got more fabric to use and I have lots of plans for it. So I really hope you'll give this a try. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I will try to respond as soon as I can. I really encourage you to reach outside of your comfort zone. Use the tools you currently have, even if they're not ideal. Find a way to use them. Be creative in what you do with them. I hope you make your own bag and have a fun time doing it. Thank you so much for sewing with me. I am so excited to be a Grace Frame ambassador, and I look forward to doing more projects with you. Bye.